Hello and welcome to The Wizard and the Priestess. My name is Nuala and this is my co-host.
Matt, why are we talking like this?
Oh, I don't know. Today I am not the Terminator. I am a robot.
No more placenta.
She gone.
She gone?
Anyway, welcome.
Today
we are going to dive into, obviously we have just birthed our babies and we are postpartum. And we are going to move into how do they develop? What happens now? I now have a child screaming at me. What is the best, worst thing I can do?
How was it?
What do you mean?
The whole experience thus far.
Pretty good.
Pretty good? Cool.
Almost 5 years in. We're doing all right.
So, okay. The infant really develops from conception, right?
Absolutely. Physically.
We start with a single cell, and as the cells multiply, we ultimately need a government, and that government is the brain. However, the brain isn't there yet, funnily enough. It's kind of, I can't remember what stage it comes in. I know the heart comes in at week 3. By I think it's either 8 weeks or 12 weeks, all systems are fully developed.
12.
And then it goes on from there. So essentially you are in, if you look at the evolution, I think Darwinism model, how we came from the ocean, then we wormed our way onto land, into a field of gravity. What's that motion a snake does? Is it serpentine? Mm-hmm. Our way through the terrain. From there, we grew legs and we're able to develop what's called the frontal line. So moving side to side is the frontal line from our ears downwards. Then we started to crawl like a mammal. Then we started to brachiate, reach out to stuff. And then eventually, after a couple of period of time, we became bipedal. So that's essentially how we
And bipedal
developed.
means?
2 feet.
Yes.
So we're uniquely standing on 2 feet for most of our experience. So what was the question?
I didn't.
How do we develop?
Yeah, maybe that was what I asked you.
Yeah.
Yep. So
Perfect.
So the importance of that process from conception in the womb, in that water-like state, being
Yes.
the water-like being, to then coming to life through birth, transition, big first developmental transition. And I think that's what we're going to be focusing on, these developmental transitions that should occur at a certain time for human growth.
Human just development in all its glory.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we come from the ocean of the amniotic fluid, and
Then we bring the ocean with us when we're born. That's cerebrospinal fluid.
There we go.
And did you know that is one molecule away from salt water?
What's the molecule?
The one that's not salt water.
Amazing.
But if you any book you read, we are anywhere from 55 to 80% water. But down to the molecular level, we're 99.8 something % water. So that's us bringing the ocean with us. Over to you.
Beautiful. Love that, Matt. So everything is developmental. So say we've been water beings through the womb, then we come out from the water, we bring the water with us, and then we take that breath, essentially like we spoke about last time, that we flip the switch, everything changes direction. We then start to oxygenate blood through way of breathing. And one of the most profound things in human development is the necessity for human to have human contact.
Yeah.
So the necessity of being on mum's skin. And we spoke about that last time in terms of the microbial aspect. But now we're kind of transitioning that into the developmental, not just developing the immune system, but actually developing the body and the emotion and the physical. So I sort of think of it from my perspective is almost like time in the womb from conception to birth is almost like the blueprint of us as human being.
Yep.
and it's very esoteric and spiritual side of us. Then we become the physical child. So we've let go of that fetal state. We've let go of being super connected to probably our soul's purpose, the forgetting of the soul, of the, what did you call that? But anyway, yeah, so the forgetting, and then kind of the bringing it back now as we come back, as we, not bringing it back, but now the slow process of remembering through the development of our form. And the thing that is pretty clear and very clear is that without human physical contact, a baby will not survive. Development will not continue. It will stop and stunt because there is no space or place for that.
And also the child will grow up with apathy. There won't be that polarity of, love being one polarity and you can call it hate or fear at the other. They'll grow up to be an apathetic adult, and they make great criminals. Okay,
and they can also just create really emotionally restricted or emotional people that are like dysfunctional emotionally.
Well, that's an archetypal zombie, someone who's just emotionless.
Yeah, okay, and I probably...
There you go, yep.
I just feel like you're taking it to the extreme, man. Just like... bring it back a little bit. Like if you spend a lot of time in a crib as a baby, so if you were separated from your mother at an early stage, in the name of keeping you alive, say, we put you in the NICU to keep you alive. You were born not breathing, so we took you away from your mother and we put you in this special humidity crib. You have a higher likelihood of being deficient and being being in lack or losing that emotional ability to adjust, that physical ability to adjust when you are in disconnect from mother and that time. So whilst it was seen to be the necessity without physical contact.
It has an imprint.
Yes. Yeah. And it has an imprint on the development of all the layers. And anyway, it can feel really big if you have had an experience like that where your baby was taken away from you early on in the early hours postpartum, early weeks, months, years. And then we look at development from that perspective. So when I look at baby development from TCM perspective, we kind of look at it like the budding of the baby, and that starts in the wood element, and it starts from the years 0 through to 2. So from my perspective, 0 to 2 is when you still have a baby. Until they are even up to 3, they are still a baby. And so we need to be really conscious in our society when we decide that a child is no longer a baby.
Is there baby phases in TCM?
There absolutely are. And it's sort of like everything. There's cycles within cycles within cycles. So we can go, so for example, today, if I say that, okay, so from conception through to age of 2, our babies and children are in still this pre-heaven state, which means they're still in the very wood energy, which is the budding. So they're not actually blossomed into a flower yet. They haven't actually got that fire in. They haven't opened up and expanded. Yeah. And so it's not until that kind of differentiation occurs that the baby realizes that they are not part of the mother anymore, which doesn't actually start until 2 from a TCM perspective.
So that's the ego in psychology. It's when it's starting to come online.
Right. Yep. So that would be when, that differentiation starts to occur. And then that would be from essentially the ages. So then you have so from 0 to 2, there's a baby. Then you've got the toddlerdom, which is sort of like 2 to 3, 2 to 3.5, somewhere it's in that range. And then you have this kind of development of self. And that is as far as we're going to essentially go today in terms of depth or
what age
awareness.
Does that start?
And that will start at about 3 years old, so just out of toddlerdom, where we're developing more of that sense of self and that I am separate from you, very separate. You spend that toddler time between 2 and 3 being like, this is chaotic, tantrum, sensation, all these things. And then from 3 till, say, 7, there's lots of pieces in between that, of course, along the way. And if we were talking to a psychologist or a childhood development like philosopher, they would go much deeper into this. But realistically, from that 3 to 7, we're developing our sense of self more and more and more as we mature through each phase. And so each phase could be a phase into itself. So each year could have the 5 elements added to it. So through the year of being like, say, 12 months to 13 to 14 to 15 is going to have, an interlink to what's growing and what's happening and how that's, but it's just cycle within a cycle within a cycle. And how deep do you want to go, and how much time do you want to waste on that, when you can just sort of step away from the logical thinking and just watch your child and be immersed in them and be aware of them.
Watch a child be a child.
Exactly.
A child needs to be a child.
Yeah. And so I think that is, so what we're talking about today is essentially from once the birth has occurred, the heart starts beating whilst through oxygenation of blood that comes from the lungs, that comes from the breath that we're breathing. And the right brain essentially is being programmed. So we had this pre-heaven programming, or not pre-heaven, but this prenatal programming that occurred in the womb.
So what's the right brain do?
Do you want to tell me, Matt? I think you do.
I thought you were on a roll then.
No, you.
Well, the right brain's our creative brain. It's our music brain. It's our artistic. Why are you laughing?
Because you're like, so what does the right brain do? And then I was like, I think you want to answer. And you're like, well, I thought you wanted to answer, but here I go. But I want you to keep
I don't
going.
like this tone at all.
Sorry, anyway, that's why I'm laughing. You asked.
It's called artistic creative.
Artistic creative. Okay.
Yes, abstract.
Abstract. Yep.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, so that essentially is that time of, so from 0 to 7, all of these, it's almost like all of the pieces of the puzzle that were placed on us within our time in the womb, our lessons to be learnt, our energy to our temperament, our way to experience that in this world, the more spiritual aspects, and now being in the first 7 years are being solidified by the patterns of experiencing. So we have obviously what we experienced in the womb, and then what our soul chose to join this earth for, or in human form. And then we have this idea of connecting and awakening through these first 7 years. And so how we are as a parent, or how we are as a allo parent, so someone that's involved in a child's life, an uncle, aunt, grandmother, whatever that might be, we have a huge impact. And we have a huge impact on the patterning. So something that is so critical to me is the importance of how we spend those years and what our focus is on. Now, I have to, for me personally, I have taken this quite literally, that the importance of this time is massive. And so both my partner and I decided, you know what, if our child's development actually impacts the rest of their life, and we have 7 years, or at the very, very minimum 2 on this earth once they've become a child, like been born, to actually create a massive change or a massive impact on their development.
Yep.
And so we've chosen to both work differently. We've chosen this lifestyle that actually is, keeping things to a minimum because our focus is on them. And I think it's crazy to me to think what they go through in these early time and what most parents are doing, because it juxtaposes to everything that we know logically and emotionally.
What do you see most new mums and parents doing?
Well, most new mums and parents are, even before they even had their child, are preparing for how they're going to care for their child as they return to work.
Right.
That's their first focus. How will I return to work? How will I look after my child? How will that happen? How will I actually be able to afford the lifestyle that I'm currently living? And I mean, that is a massive one, because our world doesn't actually have our society, not the world, but our society does not actually give any, there's no reverence for the mother. There's just do what you can, then get back to work. And get back to work as soon as possible, because we cannot afford to live a life without you working. And it becomes like, even, I spoke of last time, or the time before. It's almost like they rush the baby out as fast as they can, because they're prepping her to get back to work so that she can start putting money back into the economy and supporting her family. It's like, this is where I think we've come so far and lost so much. Because we're in the second generation or potentially third generation of women having babies and are not being cared for and nurtured in the way that they needed to be. Because it's been, I mean, I would say that the post-war era, which would be my grandparents' era, was just scarcity survival.
Yeah.
If you were lucky enough to not live in that, then that would have changed the trajectory of your life. But essentially you would have, I imagine, if you are my parents' age, you're working really hard, and that's the way you know. You work hard, and that's how you get what you want, is because you've worked hard for it. And there's no free handouts and there's no free ride. However, they did try really hard to then set us up as like, okay, I've set you up, I've given you these opportunities, don't fuck it up. And then now, I mean, me personally, I'm probably definitely in the minority, going, hang on a minute, that doesn't make sense to me. I want to love my vocation. I love what I do. However, I also want time and space to care for my children in the way that they really need. And so I'm going to pass this over to you, Matt, in terms of that physical growth that occurs in the first, say, 0 to 12 months.
Yeah.
That physical development and how that plays out.
So firstly, we're born out of the ocean, mother's womb, then we're into a field of gravity. So we have to innately learn how to function in a field of gravity. So our subconscious mind, which when I'm saying subconscious, I'm referring to the wisdom of the cells, it has to figure out a way how to differentiate certain muscles, certain ligaments, certain joints, certain curves of the spine to be able to handle a field of gravity, how to be a functioning adult in the world, whatever world that is. So how it, quote unquote, should look is for the first 0 to, say, 3 months, and this is not like a line, it's a dotted line, so it doesn't have to go
Maneuver a few
in
months.
order. Yeah,
kind of
it can kind of
it can come up and back.
up and back all the time.
Okay.
You go through a navel radiation phase. So in the womb, we move from the belly button out, right? So that was our first sort of core conditioning, if you will. That's where we first developed the twist movement. So someone who has a deficiency in the twist pattern, as an adult, you can trace that all the way back to the womb, which could have been a stressful event during pregnancy. It could have been all kinds of stuff.
Twist pattern, is just that twisting from the centre?
Yep.
Okay.
Twisting around. Then once we go through that phase, what we're actually doing. So have you ever noticed when you put your baby down on a surface, turn your head and they're kind of moved around a bit?
Yes.
So that's called the inchworm exercise.
Inchworm.
Yes. I would love to get you to do that. I think that would be great.
Myself.
Yeah. Not yet, but when the time is right. Because that exercise starts to integrate limbs 1 and 6, which is head and tail. So that's when we first start to integrate our spinal radiation. From there, we start to roll ourselves onto our stomach. From there, the acupressure points on the forearms, hands, chest, stomach, legs, they all start to be activated. Then you pick up your head first. So the first curve in the human body to be formed is the neck. From there, we start to rock back and forward because we want to get momentum. We see mum going over there. We want to be involved because we want to know how the world works. So from there, we go into a homologous phase, which actually starts to integrate the upper and lower hemispheres of the body. I did forget to mention that during this navel radiation phase between 0 and 3, notice how kids are always putting things in their mouth?
Mm-hmm.
That's how they discover the world. They can't really see properly yet. They can't really hear properly. Well, they can hear. That's where your hearing is the best, but they can't process that into a tangible experience for them just yet. So they have to, everything's through the mouth. So kind of important movement to learn.
Hand to mouth.
Hand to mouth. So you got to eat, right? So when we go through that, and if these are missed at any point, it does show up in adulthood, often as a dysfunction of some kind. And it's amazing how many shoulder injuries I've treated, they can't actively put something to their mouth efficiently enough. They've got to really twist themselves just to get that done.
When they have a shoulder injury or... Well, that would make sense because they've got a injured shoulder, mate.
But they can't use the shoulder properly. And they don't know why they hurt their shoulder.
Oh, right.
So it's an idiopathic injury.
Okay.
And thank you to save your judgment for later.
I'm just thinking if I had a shoulder injury and I couldn't pick something up and you're like, oh, that could have been a big thing.
You didn't crawl.
He's like, nah, man, I think I
was in an accident. I fell over.
I literally fell and landed on my hand. You're like, nah.
No, crawl. Where was I up to before I was interrupted?
You were saying top to bottom, I think. So there was the...
So integrating upper and lower parts of the body.
Yeah.
Then the infant starts to sort of crawl like a lizard. That's between months 3 to 5, I believe, ish.
Yeah.
It's a rough gauge. So that's where the acupressure points stimulate the parts of the brain that are in charge of automative function, digestion, breathing, circulation, all those kinds of things. So that's when this subconscious pattern starts to be formed. When they stop crawling from like a lizard, they go into crawling like a mammal. So when they're crawling like a lizard, they're integrating left and right hemispheres of the body. Crawling like a mammal is that cross crawl. So say left hip, right shoulder, right hip, and you get that curve going. That starts to form the thoracic curve between the reptilian and crawling like a cat or a dog, so the mammalian crawl. And then after about 9 to 12 months, the infant starts to brachiate out, which means to reach out and grab something. They will crawl and sort of climb themselves up into gravity, and they'll fall over a few times. And when they get proficient enough at that, they'll either lunge or squat up, and then that's when the lumbar spine gets formed. Then they start their, primal pattern. So you're squatting, you're lunging, bending, pushing, pulling, twisting, and gait. That process should take on average about 12 months, give or take. But if, let's say, a lot of families have hard floors, wooden floors, tile floors, the infant can't develop. They put them in jolly jumpers instead. And that ultimately deconditions that toddler to be in a field of gravity. So it sets them up for a lifetime of potential musculoskeletal stuff.
Disharmony.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is really interesting. I remember reading once that one thing that really got me was don't move your child into places before they're ready. So that's when accidents happen, say. So for example, like if my daughter's like, oh, can you put me up here? Can you put me up on the high thing? And I'm like, no, you work out how to climb up there.
Yeah.
I'll support you so you don't fall off the thing, but I won't put you up there. And it is so interesting to watch and see how your first child to second child. My first child was like, okay, I better do it.
Yeah.
My second child's like, Mom, just help. I'm like, no, you're not. I'm not actually going to help you. I'm going to watch you do this. And sometimes I feel that I am helping her more.
Yeah.
Whereas my first child, I was very particular. I'm like, no, you must learn. You need to figure this out on your own. And
so third child, you just got to put it straight.
Third child is straight up top. Climb down it. I'll catch you when you fall. But it is it's quite clear the importance of the processes of how someone gets from A to B, or how someone gets from zero to birth.
Big kick.
Yeah, it's like, fuck you, Mum. You will not put me up there. I will learn.
That's for interrupting.
Gosh, so rude. But 0 to 12 months being that really important physical development phase. And I know you call that crawling. That whole process is crawling until it then becomes walking, I'm assuming, once they actually stand and do the walk. But yeah, it is very interesting, like in our world where we are, preparing to go back to work, to be separated from our child from 6 months. You know, I absolutely did do that. So the way that I coordinated that was that my partner looked after my children. And that was always the case. So we didn't have support care in a sense. It was just each other. However, they weren't with the mother. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I still breastfed both my children until over 18 months, but we had those moments, those, you know, hours in days where I wasn't with them the whole time. And whilst I don't feel guilty for that, I do definitely know that there is aspects of that have, in that separation, has created maybe different patterns for each of my children. But it is very like this being a whole concept of the crawl and how that can then play out. Now, you've touched on this before when we've spoken about it, but I just want you to now go into, if we have like these, if we don't get that time, because obviously this is, I guess, where I want to really kind of get really clear, is that we're doing ourselves a disservice by not actually being with our children. Now, that's not to say I'm not trying to guilt you into doing things differently. I myself went back to work early, but I've taken sacrifices to ensure that my partner is then there for the carer or someone close to us, rather than putting them into a centre where there is then, you know, one carer to 4 or 5 people, or I know it's meant to be less than that when they're little, but it doesn't end up being that. And even then it's too much. My child, like, you know, I didn't do the right thing. I'm not saying to follow my lead, but I'm just saying that I tried to make conscious choices to ensure that these developmental processes happened safely and happened with care. And we have this idea that I think it's been, you know, some form of, you know, it's actually really good for the kid to go and be social when they're very, very little. However, we know that that's so disconnected from the actual development of childhood. But we have this, it's almost like it's been kind of a nice thing to say so that mothers don't feel guilty about what they're going back to work so soon.
Yeah.
But then there are, like, we are seeing this all the time. Like, I think as a child, occupational therapy wasn't a thing. Now, I think most children have an occupational therapist.
Really?
Yeah. Especially ones that have, like, you know, a little bit of delay. You know, they went and get their health check and they had a bit of a delay.
Is that because they're delayed, or they got something going on, or they're not keeping up, or what's the usual
I don't know
thing?
what the usual thing is, but I would say that like it's potentially showing up physically, but more than likely it'd be showing up emotionally. That seems to be, you know, or there's those physical things, like, you know, their arms are like, you know, they kind of got stuck. Their arms are stuck in a position, or their legs are not moving in the way, or they're, you know, and we've expanded out that time frame as well. So not walking before, like, by 1 is sort of normal now. And it's more that it's expanded to, you know, 18 months. You know, if you don't, you should be walking by 18 months. And I don't know whether there's a wrong or right to that. You know, taking a little bit longer can't be a terrible thing, as long as the parents are just sticking to their gut that tells them whether this is good or not. Because if your gut's telling you that this isn't good, but the doctor's telling you this is fine, that, you know, there just might be a slow learner. Do you treat children? Do you treat them in terms of that developmental milestones that are not being met?
To be honest, I treat more adults with that developmental milestone hadn't been met. It shows up as poor digestion, emotional imbalance, which the part of the brain, the amygdala, which polices the emotions, gets stimulated during mammalian crawling. The reptilian is all the automotive process. So any breathing dysfunction you can trace back to when they were 3 months old. I don't see it in kids too much because it's not usually pronounced that much in a child.
What would you see as pronounced?
I haven't seen it personally.
Yeah, but what would you see as pronounced when you're seeing, you know, you've treated my kids before, or one of them, and, like, what would you see in that moment? Like, you're not necessarily maybe going into the physical aspects of what's not been developed, but what would you normally, like, identify in that sense, like that something physically hasn't...
In a child?
Yeah.
It's hard to see in a child because I don't really see them moving.
Okay.
It would be if a child was really, really uncoordinated or really, really weak for their age, digestion, yeah. Like if they've had an upset tummy since all but day one, I would look at mum's diet and see how that correlates to the child.
Interesting one, because if I were to see a child with a digestive upset, I probably would go less towards diet and more towards the emotion.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it obviously,
well, certainly wouldn't.
Diet is also really important.
There's always an emotional imprint from mum and dad. I think I've just seen more diet related in my personal experience with it. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That children have like some form of, they're just not eating the right foods, or
Well, they're not getting the right food through mum if they're breastfeeding. And if they're a small, like let's say a 3-4-year-old, and like if I think he was, I can't remember, let's say 4, and the mum bought him because he thought he was ADHD. I said, how much? She goes, he eats so much sugar. I said, well, who buys the sugar? And she does, obviously. But she thought he had like an actual something mental going on. I said, cut the sugar out, he'll be fine. And she did, and he was.
yeah,
Still is. So that's more we'd call that probably an environmental thing
it's function over
than the actual crawling itself.
Yeah, and I guess that's the thing in terms of development of the right side brain and this creative artistic lens with which we from my perspective, it's almost like it's only open for the first 7 years, and then after that, once the left brain really kicks on and we have that complete sense of self, and we start to move into this like division of yin and yang, and this awareness of like, okay, I am now that, like I am now this, I am, I have this like awareness of being able to take information in, understand it in my mind, and then be able to spit it out. That's already happening in young children. Like I look at my 4-year-old, or even when she was 3, like she was capable of that, taking in information. But that processing that happens from left to right before it gets spat back out, from my perspective of what I've learned and experienced, is now that is what that pattern has come from what occurred from 0 to 7 years old.
Right.
So it's like it's now the lens with which child will see the world. It's all of those pieces from 0 to 7, essentially from conception to this moment now, is based upon what occurred during that time.
Yeah.
So this lens, like it's like information comes in, and now that lens is within. So there's all the lenses within, and that's how they will then perceive all the information to then shoot it out. And so a really big thing for me is how we teach and guide a child. And personally, I get really particular about deinstitution. Oh, this actually isn't a word, but reducing institutionalization of child's education.
That was beautifully said.
Thank you. But it's because the institution is based upon having a whole heap of children together and doing the very best they can with the masses. And I'm not saying they're not doing...
One size fits all.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And like recently I've spoken to a teacher, and she was saying that, we have 100 kinder kids coming in next year. And I was like, 100 kinder kids, how do you split that up? That's like, 10 classes, or not 10, but say 5 or 6 classes. She's like, no, it'll be 32 kids in each class. And I just think you've gone from a kindergarten...
What age is kindergarten? Is that 5?
5 years old.
Yeah.
So you've gone from preschool potentially, 3 till 4 till 5, or 3 to 4, with maybe I think the ratio in preschools these days is 1 to 5. So 1 caregiver to 5 children. You then go into a classroom of 1 to 32.
Bit of a difference.
How are you ever going to get any of your needs met? And then you go into a playground and there's 100 children your age.
Do you know how you get your needs met? You have to exaggerate everything.
Yeah.
Or you have to stand out somehow, so you hit someone or you throw something, or...
You make things louder.
You're naughty.
Well, yeah, and
Yeah.
then all of a sudden we've got all these children that are really naughty, and then you've got the kids that are actually probably naughty because they're not even receiving anything at home. So it's like we're so layered into this idea that the institution is going to support us and save us and look after us. From my perspective, it's just not like that. And the hardest thing is to move away from that because everything's set up for that.
Yeah.
So you're then trying to do things like me. I'm trying to do things in like very abstract ways to nearly every person I know because they're just looking at me like, why would you even bother? That's so hard. Why would you want to homeschool your child?
Is that weird? Not for
What?
you, but I mean, is it considered weird?
Absolutely.
Right. I reckon I'd be weird too.
Yeah, you 100% are weird, Matt. Like that's just a
Thank you. That's the
solid.
nicest thing you've said to me today.
But it is so. I even have this. So I send my kids to bush school because they play in the bush and that's their thing. That's all they do. They play in the bush all day. They're playing. They're literally using their imagination. They're creating it's not just like a bush play. It's also they're teachers wanting to teach. So they are also trying to create play spaces that help to activate the imagination. But recently one of the teachers was like, we've done your daughter's really interested in letters and numbers. And so we're going to start to teach her letters and numbers. And I was like, huge alarms in my head. Like, no. She's in the bush. Let her play in the bush. She doesn't need letters and numbers. That goes against what that's institutionalized. That's the institution is doing that. I don't need her to learn letters and numbers. They're like, yeah, but she really loves them. And I'm like, I've got to sit with this and grapple with what is it in me that's blocking that.
Yeah, because is that a institution or is that your conditioning?
Yeah. Totally. I get my conditioning is to teach a child to read and write and do all these things.
Because the analytical brain, which is that left brain, doesn't really start coming online until you're about 10 years of age, around 7 to 10.
Yeah.
So
That's it.
Teaching the numbers thing doesn't theoretically make sense.
No. To teach that to my 4-year-old.
So I see where you're coming from.
So that's what my thinking is now. It's like, well, why? I don't need them to. But the thing is, she really enjoys that. And I'm like, yeah, because she's a little girl that
There's
is really.
always one.
But it's like it makes and I've spoken to a few of my girlfriends and they're also in bush school and they're like, if they enjoy it, let's let them do that. Like that, what are you blocking them from? And I'm like, yeah, okay, all right, I really need to sit with this. Like, of course she's going to enjoy it. She enjoys being on the iPad and watching the TV too, but I try and reduce that down.
Yeah.
And that's obviously different because it's not the same. But there's pieces of me that are like, is this developmentally the best thing that they could be doing? Is this, because I know that she enjoys letters and numbers, but part of me knows that both me and my partner are very specific in the way that we think.
Right.
And she's obviously going to gravitate towards that. You speak to anyone in most people, family members in both of our family lines are very analytical. They're very good at the left side brain. They're very good at the masculine, thinking. Very boxy.
Very linear, yeah.
Very linear. And so, there's a part of me that's like,
So where's that at then? Is she doing the numbers or?
I think she'll be doing the numbers.
Okay.
Unless
as long as it's not an exam and she's being
of
graded
course
or
there's
anything.
no exam and that's a whole nother level. We've got grading in year 1. Child is 6 years old. Before their left brain is even on, they're being analytically judged.
Yeah.
So it is.
A patient of mine came in with a kid and apparently in year 1 they've got homework now.
Oh, kindergarten, they have homework. And the way they sell it to the way they sell it to the parents, which it's it's just reading, it's learning, teaching them to read and write. And that's really important because a child must read and write and know how to do that. And I guess this is just the other side. The alternate is that, no, they don't need that yet.
No, they need to be told stories. That's how they learn. They learn in stories. They learn with metaphor and connotation and dragons and gods and whatever else they can correlate something to.
Yeah, which is called play.
Yeah.
Essentially, everything is learnt through play, whether that's through the hands or through the imagination. And that is the way that the first 7 years have been actually curated to be formed.
Yeah.
And then through the industrialization of schooling, because it's been better to get them functioning learning to sit down, learning to be quiet, learning to be told, that all of that stuff sort of has to go because kids play and they're noisy. Kids play and they move.
Do you know where the Western school system got its model from?
You tell me. Prison
Slavery
system?
days.
Oh, slavery. Makes perfect sense.
So it's a babysitting system. It's not education.
And I would say that some might disagree with that and say that it is education because it's the education in the form of the way that we understand education to be, rote learning where information is literally downloaded. So you're actually having a program downloaded on you because...
Maybe I should call that schooling then, not education.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Because the program is being downloaded and those first 7 years is setting you up. It's almost like...
You're a sponge, absolute sponge.
Right. So in knowing that though, I can't do that. And so there's part of me that goes, okay, if she's a sponge, I need to be very conscious of where she's going.
Yeah.
Which means that I make decisions like based on, okay, I know if she goes into that space, this is the energy that's going to be around that. The vibration is about achieving and going and getting. And so when a friend of ours asked, oh, do you want your 4-year-old to play soccer this year? Part of me was like, no. I don't need her to be focused on goals and winning and all of those things.
Do they keep score?
They don't.
No.
But I mean, like, it's very hard for an adult who's grown up with scoring to not be like, oh, we lost again. I'm like, we had so much fun.
Yeah.
And I'm not, see, this is where I guess once we get to that 7 and 8, like I'm not really for, or even over, maybe to 10 years old, I'm not really for everyone getting an award.
Right. Yeah.
That's a big thing, though.
Yeah.
It's a big thing to let everyone know that they're worthy.
Right.
Because children don't believe that they're worthy. I'm not really for that. I think that belittles the whole.
Yeah.
There is always going to be one winner in the world because there's always going to be the survival of the fittest. And so if we dumb that down and say, no, everyone is equal, we're all the same, beautiful to some extent in some areas, but we're all so different. Probably shouldn't have opened that can of worms because I really don't know where it goes. But all I know is that from my personal belief, I don't think everyone needs a participation award. I do think the first person who runs over the line wins. However, at 4 years old, that absolutely doesn't feel like a necessity to be. I mean, all the kids keep score, right? Because that's what they've been trained in. You know, we're watching soccer. We're watching the, soccer players play and they're keeping score.
Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree. I'm not for that everyone gets a participation award. I can see why they would. But if the issue is them not feeling worthy, I don't think that's coming from school.
No.
Or their sport.
No, and then let's bring this back to development and the importance of the mother and father in the child's development and in that pattern programming.
Yeah.
Who you were at conception is essentially who your child is through the soup of their download. They also chose that, so we trust that. But then it's also being really conscious or aware that who we are now as they continue to grow, how we relate to the world within each other, how we relate as mother and father together, how we relate to our child is actually programming them even more. Yeah. So if you're choosing to, if you're choosing obedience over love, if you're choosing to separate from over lean in, there is a huge interplay in how that plays out in development. Yeah. And it starts from day dot. And what I've noticed personally is that when I started to be triggered by my first child, which was at about 18 months old, I truly believe that was the time in which my mum probably was triggered by me. Yeah. And as I was 18-month-old starting to separate from, understanding the separation, that we are not one and I can actually say no. Yeah. Or I can disagree and demonstrate that through emotional ways. Yeah. That frustrated my mum.
Well, how an infant is nurtured in the first 2 years of their life neurologically wires them for life. Yeah. And how a male relates with his mother and how a female relates to their father wires them up relationally for that with that sex for life.
Fantastic.
So good luck.
We're
So
fine.
so my relationship with mother or
Yes.
stepmom wires me how to relate to women.
Hence why I'm here.
That's why.
Really feminine. But absolutely.
Yeah.
Like I see that in most of my partners. I chose someone either similar to my father
Yeah.
or brothers. And
And that's your unconscious attempt to heal that. Which is
what a conundrum.
oh, we're funny creatures, aren't we?
But it is really interesting because
Yeah.
we can go really deep on
Yeah.
that. And then we can also go like I had this personal story, but my father was very like authoritative when I was little. He was very much like, you do as I say, you listen to me, you know, very hard. Also really loving, and we spent a lot of time in nature and we did lots of bushwalking, and there was lots of play and lots of laughing. But if things were not as they were meant to be, there was a harsh punishment.
Right.
And then in adulthood, it almost was because there was no harsh punishment that was able to be used anymore, because now, you know, you're not going to smack me or you're not
Yeah.
going to ground me because you can't, because I'm an adult. Now there was no holding,
Yeah.
because that was the way that things were held, was through punishment.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, there's this idea that it's like this really softness that almost it dissipates masculinity. So it's like this, now I've just got this like, oh, well, I'll have to step into that position and be strong enough and more masculine, because that role is not existing unless I can punish.
Yeah.
So the masculinity aspect was in the punishment, which is not really it's not a very healthy way to express masculinity.
No.
And so then then that was kind of like this, interplay. And now right now I'm moving one daughter out of my space so that I can, or at least I'm not looking after her in the evenings now if she wakes or whatever. My partner is going to do that as this baby's arriving. And part of that is like I listened to her feeling really sad, and I said to my partner, I'm like, are you like bringing her really close? And I usually tell her that everything's okay. And are you like whispering sweet nothings in her ear? Are you giving her kisses on her cheeks? Are you holding her really, really close? Are you standing up with her and rocking her when she doesn't settle? And I'm like, I have to let this go. I have to allow him to take this position, because I need this space for me right now. And I've chosen to have another child. So this is where we're at.
Yeah.
But it is really difficult to sit in and be like, oh, what impact is this having on her? This separation that she's now experiencing, how is this going to interplay? Like, she's 2 years old. Is this, all of these layers? And I mean, at the end of the day, I've done a bit of work with this lady named Alex. Her Portal by Alex is her tag. And she really talks about, if we were only meant to have one child, we would have been made with one egg, or one off time, but we're not. So we have been created to have more than with numerous children. So there is an aspect of that development as well when you have siblings, and how that plays on, and the flow on of that.
Yeah.
I got sidetracked, but here we are.
Where are we up to?
I guess the next thing is, in terms of health and child development, there is this idea that children really need, and this is an alternate view, I'm going to tell you the view that is, and then the view that is alternate. So there's an idea that we need to go and have a health check, or our child needs to get a health check to identify whether they are functioning at the right level. So what you described at 3...
Is that a medical thing?
Yeah, tends to be. There's no other option.
Right.
It's not, there isn't really that many, like, even alternate physicians that do childhood developmental checks.
Okay.
So the way that you would probably do them, okay, I've got a child, here's 0 to 3 months. Okay, let's do the checks. Like, what's going on? This is where essentially they should be up to ish.
Yeah.
Let's check if they're covering those things off. Let's check their reflexes. Let's check how they're responding to light. Let's check how they're moving in their body.
Yeah.
That would be something if you were to focus on those particular developmental things,
Yeah.
that would be something that would be needed and called for.
Yeah.
Because the only other option is to go and do a health check with a doctor, and they don't have the physical understanding, physical emotional correlation in development.
That's purely physical.
Well, yeah, and it's not. It's purely physical in one way, and then really essentially it's a setup. It's not a setup, but it's a preparation to give medication.
Right.
So you have your health check that essentially is, okay, well, at this health check, we'll just check you over to make sure that the basics are covered.
So you've got to fall into a specific parameter type thing?
It's quite specific. There is quite specific parameters that they want you to fall into. I have the blue book that they give to every mother that has a child within New South Wales. I don't know if it's Australia-wide. And and I've followed the book and seen where my child is, and she's always, I often check 6 months prior to check where she's up to, and then if she's got, there might be things that I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, so we've got 6 months to kind of check in with those things that, she's meant to be able to stand on one leg, she's meant to be able to, in accordance with the check, but I've never gone to a physician to check whether or not that was... I'm just doing it myself. Yeah. And it's pretty simple stuff. It's like, are they able to, are they forming sentences? Are they saying one single words? Are they able to use 2 words in a sentence? Right. Are they able to communicate? And so I've never, the stand on one leg was one thing. Like they should be able to hop on one leg at 3 or something maybe. Whatever it might be. And I think my child could hop on one leg but couldn't hop on the other. Right. So then we did lots of hopping to see. It's like rehab. It's like, but I think that sort of thing. Yeah. And I think the thing is, like, for me personally, I don't want to go to a physician to have a conversation about a medicalized treatment that doesn't really make sense to me through the development of children.
Just a one-size-fits-all approach, which seems to be the recurring theme in the Western world. You give everyone that has symptom ABC this medication. What could go wrong? You never hear of any side effects. Isn't that weird? Just saying.
And I think it's really difficult because if you choose a different path, then you're kind of, you're ridiculed for one, and you're separated and segregated. Yeah. Because you can't actually have any of the institutions. They're not available to you. Unless you do as we say and follow a specific regime as we tell you to, you won't be able to participate. And I remember at the beginning it felt really hard as a new mother to feel that. And then slowly I've just kind of, I'm going to go my own way, because at the end of the day I'm watching and listening to what you're telling me to do, and it doesn't actually make sense to me. Yeah. Because there's no conversation about the food other than don't feed your young baby juice. That's one of the number one things that is said in this book. It's like, don't feed your young baby juice. It's like, holy shit that someone thought that was a good idea. Yeah. Of course you don't feed your young baby juice. They're mammals. They drink milk. Or, if they need supplementation, or if they need support because mum isn't producing what she needs, that there's options in that sense. However, and I think it's really difficult because there are institutions there trying to help women and mothers produce more milk, but then the same institution's telling her to get back to work. So how does a woman... And pumping and feeding your child from a bottle is not an easy thing.
It's not really ideal for the infant's development either.
No, and I've heard some really interesting things about generally you tend to feed with your, what did you call my right hand earlier?
Don't know.
You said, don't use your left hand, use your dominant hand. Yeah. Generally, as a mother who bottle feeds, she'll use her dominant hand. So the baby only lays on that side and only looks up from that side. Yeah. So he's only using that movement. Whereas a breastfeeding baby will feed from both sides, so they're using both movements. Yeah. Just
I got to cover.
But it is, right? Like that's something that's really important to actually understand, is that we have these 2 different movements, but if you're feeding from your right, like you've got to remember, I don't know because I've never bottle fed my babies, but like do they teach you to make sure you use your left hand too? Because that developmentally is going to have a huge impact on the movement of the head and the movement of the baby. Yeah. And then obviously the growth, the positioning of the mouth and the way that they move their mouth.
Yeah, because on a bottle they just clamp down and then they get a squirt of milk or formula or whatever.
Yeah.
But when they attach to the nipple, their underjaw first has to hook and then suck back. So it's a whole head, neck activity.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, and that, like all of these things is not to guilt someone into not having done that or whatever, because I have plenty of women in my own circle of friends that are like, I would have loved to do that. I tried everything to do that. But the one thing they weren't offered in advice was, hey, hon, how are you feeling?
Yeah.
How's you and your partner?
Yeah.
How's this relationship? How are you relating to the world right now? How are you relating to your baby right now?
Because whether you know it or not, you're teaching that child, even though it could be 1 year old, how to be in a relationship.
Absolutely.
The whole time. So.
And so it's like one thing that Gabor Mate, I did some work with him, and I asked him, I'm like, so how do I try my best not to F up my children? And he's like, well, tell me, when was it that your parents started to work on themselves? And I was like, I would say they haven't started yet. And he's like, well, there you have it. You're already so much further ahead. And then he said, and then the next thing is to make sure that your relationship with self is solid.
Yeah.
And then your relationship with your partner. Don't give up on that. You need to focus on those two relationships. They are the most important thing. And this sort of brings it full circle back to what I've talked about in terms of pregnancy, and from the Taoist principle perspective is just that whole thing of like what we do with ourselves and how we work within ourselves is actually impacting our children.
Yeah.
So if you are well, likely your child will be well. And that wellness isn't just physical wellness, that's also holistic wellness, which includes...
It's got to be the whole mind, body, spirit thing.
Absolutely.
Because you can't separate them. And between the ages of 0 to 2/3, while the infant doesn't really know that it's separate, it's its own entity, they think they're you, and they look watching you, and they're imprinting everything every single second. And we wear our beliefs, and you can take it right back to the womb every time. No pressure.
And it's a big thing.
It's a huge thing, yeah.
So if we're going to do anything in this lifetime, I would say that if we are, and we choose to have children, we should make sure that where we are in this moment and who we're moving towards in creating who we're moving towards creating and then preparing to receive, we should be very clear on who we are right now.
I have a question for you. Mm-hmm. If someone can't breastfeed and can't, for whatever reason, do the things that you're talking about, what would you recommend?
First of all, if you can't breastfeed, you have to just, really lean into what you can do, because I think a lot of the time there's a breastfeeding breakdown in trauma of birth. And so if there's trauma at birth, then it's going to impact or have a potential impact.
Yep.
Doesn't always have to be that way. But then is there in trauma postpartum? How much did you receive energy and support? So it's sort of just being a little bit clearer on like, okay, I probably wasn't as nourished as I could have been. Not necessarily through food, but through companionship. Yep. I probably didn't get the support I needed because my partner took 10 days off and that's all he got. And then I was alone to tend to this child who how?
Yeah.
But then I would say that my next point of call would be to obviously see a lactation consultant. There are some really beautiful women that are fantastic at that. Being really conscious of conflicting advice, being conscious of mothers groups that tell you all sorts of different things, and just going straight to a source that feels safe for you. Yeah. Once you've experienced that, and if you've decided that, no, actually, I can't, because this is a big learning, it's not necessarily that we can't do what we need to do. It's that it doesn't feel like we can.
Yeah.
So it's like, I probably could do the thing, but at the end of the day, if your only point of call or the knowledge that you've got is to pump from the minute your baby's been born, you're going to probably resent breastfeeding. Your nipples are going to be sore because they're going to be sore anyway. They have to actually build up the sensation of having a child suck on your breast, which is interesting because my partner, when we first had my first child, he would put his finger.
So we're completely different.
No, he put his finger in her mouth she didn't have to suck on me all the time,
yeah.
and he was like, "Whoa,
Yeah.
this is a bloody," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's happening on here, yeah." And then it's you got.
Yeah.
So it is a hard process to get started usually, but if you've had a beautiful birth, then you've set yourself up for the next and the next and the next.
Yeah.
However, if it were so that, say for me personally, something happened and I were unable to breastfeed, I would go to a milk bank,
Okay.
and I would use other women's milk.
Okay.
For as long as I possibly could. I would reach out to the groups and families that I know, in the circles that I know, and I would ask for milk if anyone had any milk available, because a human breast milk is going to be the next best thing from the mother's breast milk.
Yeah.
And then from there, I would look towards making my own formula to ensure that I was covering all the bases. And there are some really beautiful formulas out there.
Yeah, I know Western Price Foundation has heaps of recipes.
Yeah.
Really good ones.
And I would probably opt for those things there.
Yeah.
I don't think I would opt for store-bought. However, I'm sure that if I needed to, I would find my way there.
Yeah.
Also, just remembering that, you have to do what's right for you. There is no right or wrong. And a lot of the time I've heard from women who really did want to breastfeed and really wanted to. There's a lot of women, they're like, this is too hard, I don't want to. That's different.
Yeah.
But if you really want to breastfeed, a lot of the time you need the support and you need to be held in that decision. I really want to breastfeed. I want support with that. Not, you know what, hon, maybe you just need to let it go. That's not the answer. Most of the time, if you can grow a baby in your womb, you can breastfeed them.
Yeah.
But that's like the simplest point. At the end of the day, you need to have all the pieces in alignment. You need to have no trauma at birth that you don't have to deal with. You've traumatized birth. Well, how's your body going to open? Because you need to be vulnerable constantly to be able to breastfeed.
Yeah.
And then if you've had a hard postpartum because you've got this pressure to get back to work, or your partner's gone back to work, you're now alone with a crying baby all day, you don't have support. Oof. Like the first 6 months of a baby's life is big. And then it's like, and no pressure, but that is the most important time of their life. You're literally downloading every feeling that you're having. No pressure. I think it's a really big time. In the first 7 years, you fuck those up. No pressure.
Yeah.
They're going to have health ailments for the rest of their life. No pressure. It is pressure filled.
Yeah.
It is massive. And that's why I would say that the most important thing to do is have a real good look at your value system.
Yeah. But also if there is, let's say, a played out trauma that's presented itself later in life, you can trace that back to infant development. And regardless of the age, you can work with that. So everything is reversible. Absolutely.
And that's probably the end of it. Really, this isn't it. Even if mum and dad weren't really holding and nourishing you in the way that you needed to be nourished, you're okay.
Yeah.
Because you can
ways.
heal all things. You just have to want to.
Well, if you want to learn more about infant development, or if you feel like you need infant development assessment, you can see a check level 2 or higher, or study the program yourself. And that's what we teach in level 2. All of that stuff that goes for 5 days.
Yeah, cool. Beautiful. We will write a link for that.
I don't get commissions, that's fine.
So
is there anything else that you want to touch on?
No, I just want to say that the first 7 years of a child's life is really important. You're likely to fuck up a little bit, and that's okay. Your child will be okay. And they chose you. And they chose you in the moment as you are for who you are. So never forget that. You are enough.
Thanks, guys.
Peace.
You've been listening to The Wizard and the Priestess. Thanks for stopping by. Stay connected, and be open.